Life isn't perfect, and neither are we.
Nope. But we know how to face our fears
And have some fun.
and talk about all the messiest things of life.
Like the messiest things.
Get connected to yourself, get connected to others, and get connected to the life right in front of you.
This is The Connected Life with Justin and Abby.
That's me.
That's you.
And you.
Check. We're good.
We should call this the Two Bald Guys Show.
Two bald guys.
We're here at The Connected Life, and guys, so excited for today's guest, Jason Valentin. He's a good friend of mine going back for years. Recently, him and his wife, Lauren, came on, and they talked about their journey of getting married on the other end of Jason's divorce, and him finding love and remarrying, and then the journey of trying to have kids. And there was a lot of complications in that, and a lot of miracles around the whole thing. And if you haven't listened to that, you can go back a few episodes and you'll find there's a 2-part episode with them inside of it. But with that said, Jason, you and I go back since the time I moved here, which was 13, 14 years ago.
Yeah, a long time.
The first time that we met, you showed up at a friend of ours' house that we were staying at, and Abby opened the door and then slammed the door in your face, I think. Is that how that went?
Probably. Those were back in my single days, I think.
Uh-huh.
And those were just so much fun times. I talked about that in our last podcast. But yeah, I don't know why she slammed the door in my face. Maybe I had, tried to pursue her or something like that.
I think it was just something funny, something you'd said at the door, then she jokingly shut the door in your face or something. But it was really cool because Jason has a history of going on a heart journey himself. And both of us had gone on that. And you had a background in kind of pastoral counseling. Would that be the way to?
Yeah. So I came on staff at Bethel in 2004 to the school ministry.
Yeah.
And so I've been there for almost 20 years.
Yeah. And Abby and I had been developing a lot of emotional health stuff on our end, just in our personal health growth process. And there were times where Jason just invited me into the space, like, hey, come participate with us over here and share what you have to share in this process. And it was really cool because there were just times that I felt deeply loved that you went, hey, I see you, and let me create some space over here and jump in with me. And honestly, I've told this story before, but my first big men's conference that I participated in, you said, hey, come join me. Let's do a men's conference together. And I had a huge meltdown where you ended up spooning me at one point. It's just a hysterical story, but I talk about it all the time because it's a conversation that is about being willing to dive into our pain and be weak and vulnerable as a man and allow masculinity to show up in some very caring, loving, nurturing ways. And you came and found me on the floor, sob crying in my house as Abby had called you.
Yeah, she called me.
Yeah, and you just laid down there and put your arm around me and was like, "Hey, what's going on, buddy?" And I could tell I was in an emotional flashback of my childhood, being a little kid. And it was one of those first moments that I really felt a fathering figure enter in with nurture in that moment and go, oh, okay, the little kid, like the adult in me didn't need it. The adult Justin was like, hey, I'm good. I can face this. The little kid that was blowing up, it was like, this is restoration that needed to happen. And I needed some form of fathering aspect that comes in and says, I'm actually here for you.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like we're every age that we've ever been.
Yes, all at once.
Yeah, all at once. And we don't leave that. And I know we're not going to jump into that bunch right now, but it's shocking when you realize that 8 or 10 or 12-year-old boy is still very much alive and he hasn't grown an inch emotionally, mentally. I mean, he's still, if you didn't solve the needs that he has, if you haven't met those needs, he still has a lot of opinions, a lot of pain, that you have to go in and meet. And I mean, that's what's happening.
Yeah. I think that there's something, as a side note about us, I think that we may have some different approaches to life and certain value systems and stuff, but we always have the core value of love, you and I. And we always agree on love and emotional health and well-being and stuff like that. And the reason that I point that out is that I think a lot of times people who are friends, like they can't respect each other in having disagreements. Everything has to be 100% across the board, or like, I'm the same as you. And I think that we just have, I couldn't even articulate them now, but I think we have different approaches at certain levels. But I always sit there and go, I love that I have a friend that we agree on all of this over here, and that all of this that may be unspoken or whatever it is that we could disagree on, we just have value and respect and honor for each other in the places that we, the roles that we fill and the places that we fill.
Yeah, I hope so. You know, I think that people who have to have everyone in their life agree with them.
Yeah.
I mean, my wife doesn't agree with me. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's a lot of what shaped me in my life, is that.
Oh, massively. Me too.
She doesn't fully agree with me. And so it's in those places of honoring one another, but also growing and learning and changing. And I don't agree with me 5 years ago, you know, like for real.
Me either. Yeah.
I look back and go like, okay, yeah, that was a good year, but I think different things now.
Yeah.
And that's all right.
Yeah. And I think that, as a side note, like we were talking about, like, you don't agree with yourself from 5 years ago. One of the things that we teach in like our life consulting masterclass that we do for the year-long thing is we talk about the idea that, like, right now, truths that we are teaching are going to evolve into something else, and something that has a deeper level of understanding of love and how we choose to teach it and express it. And you shouldn't feel shame or bad about that. Like, people, like, we should be celebrating the continued evolutionary knowledge of love and health and all of that stuff. And I think a lot of people easily spiral into shame, like if they didn't get it right, and they look back at their previous years and, I don't agree with who I was back here. And instead of just being like, oh, that's so beautiful, look at all the ways I've grown, I've developed and stuff like that. And
it's just it's a measure of growth, right? What I do today is, you know, I'm doing it on a different level than last year, and I'm able to challenge what I thought last year and grow beyond that. And I think, you know, someone once said feedback is the mother of learning. And so I really do. I feel like I'm constantly, especially right now in my life, I'm constantly trying to open myself up for feedback and figure out where can I grow, because, you know, you and I, this is our whole life. This is what we do, is we are constantly putting out content, growing ourselves so that we can give that away. I mean, that's genuine. That is what I get paid to do day in and day out. And so, man, if I'm not challenging what I thought a year ago, if I'm not challenging, you know, my practices, my personal practices, what I was doing 6 months ago, like, I'm not growing.
Yeah.
And my life isn't to where I want it to be right now.
Yeah.
So I'm going to grow and I'm going to change. And that requires a lot of pain and discomfort and, you know, ego. I'm just constantly, at some points, you know, I feel shame just like anyone else, and go like, oh man, I'm protecting my ego here. Wow, I'm chasing money because I really just want security. That's a bad motive. You know, I should want to grow and steward my life, because the mature thing to do is responsible, right? So, I mean, there's just tons of different areas in my life where I'm growing. And
I think one of the greatest expressions of maturity, before we, you know, we're going to jump into the kind of some of the deeper details of what we're talking about today, but I think one of the greatest expressions of maturity is an acknowledgement and ownership, a continual acknowledgement of, hey, here's the mess, here's where I'm at, here's where I don't have it together, especially when you're in a leadership position where it's just like, hey, yeah, actually yesterday I had a meltdown at my wife and my kids, and I really found myself really scared to do this thing. And it's actually living out of a space of being willing to humanize ourselves to the world around us.
It's my way that I don't have to work as hard.
Yeah.
Because if I hide all that stuff, then I have to pretend to be somebody that I'm not, right? Yep. And that expectation is so much to bear.
It's daunting.
It really is. So, you know, my strength comes in living in community, and my strength comes in honestly, being able to live out what happens at home. I just live that out everywhere in my life. Yeah. So I don't have to live two lives.
I agree.
So,
and that's the thing that saves us. I know in the last season, Abby and I, man, like we had a hell of a run going through processing our past pain of the first parts of our marriage and stuff like that. And there were times where I was like, I don't even know if we're going to make it through this.
Yeah.
And the only saving grace to me as we were like trying to walk through all of it was
you would never find a better person.
I don't think I'd want to find anyone after her. I'm going to go be a hermit.
I'm going to go paint some more G.I. Joes.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Hang out with my action figures.
Yeah.
but what my saving grace was the idea that my whole message ultimately ends up being like, hey, we're just really messy. We don't have it all together.
Yeah.
And we're trying to find our journey. Like we're trying to find out what love actually looks like continually in our process and what wholeness looks like. And I think that's the only thing that gave me a sense of peace as I was in it. I was like, all right, well, if this ship sinks, I'm just going to start the disconnected life.
Yeah. Yeah. Phase 2.
But with that said, I know that like there's been a lot of messiness in your history that you've been very vocal about. And I want to dive into some of it because some of your early messiness that you brought up in the last podcast talking about your divorce.
Yeah.
Led to quite an extensive journey of facing some pretty heavy bouts of anxiety and some depression and things like that. And I think that people feel permanently trapped within anxiety and depression. Oftentimes once they hit it, they're like, I don't even know how to get out of it. And usually the out is further medication. And that even perpetuates more anxiety and more depression and things like that. And I just want to hear more because I know that we have a lot of listeners that have lived a lot of life. They've had their divorces, they've had their breakups, they've like had so many problems within intimacy and relationships. And I think that you're a fantastic person to talk about inside of that because I don't think that you vilified your ex at all in part of what happened in your divorce. And I don't think you have personal shame and self-hatred about that process and that relationship not working out.
Yeah. No, zero.
Yeah. So, and I think that there's a lot of hope for people to be like, oh, well, I could get to the other side of all that. And so I want to hear more about your story and some of the roadmap as you were walking out and what was like the cause for a lot of the anxiety inside of it. So if you want to just kind of dive into.
Yeah, for sure. So I got married really young and, met my wife in high school. So she's my high school sweetheart and I engaged at 17 and married at 18 and had my first son before our,
Before you could drink?
For our 1-year wedding anniversary.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Way before I could drink for sure. And, so life started out really fast and honestly, just fun and innocent. I grew up in a small town, so there's not much to do in a small town. My dad was engaged to my mom when she was 13 or 14. I mean, it's kind of in the family. Crazy. Yeah, for reals. And I guess that's what you do in the freaking 50s or something. I don't know. In the 20s. How old's my dad, 1900s. Listen, guys.
Listens to this.
In the
How old do you think I am?
In the 1900s, that's what kids did, is they got married. And it's kind of true. So in my family, it was really common. That was just a common practice, was to, you find somebody that you want to be with. And so I did that. And life was going fairly well. I had 3 kids by the time I was 24.
See, that's crazy to me. I like 25, I was just getting married and I could barely function with life at that point.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Me too. Could barely no, I mean, I really, I had such a good upbringing that I wouldn't even say, like, looking back, oh, I wasn't ready. Like, I was fine. My marriage didn't end because I wasn't ready. I was a really good, kind, loving kid and got married. And so, 24, had 3 kids and vasectomy, and, life was good. I was a pastor. the school of ministry here in Reading, and loved my life, and everything's going along pretty normal. And then about 2006, the end of 2006, I just realized something's wrong. Like something just feels a little bit off, which, listen, if you've been married for any amount of time, that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Like you just feel like, wow, we're in a rough patch.
Yeah. What is happening?
This
here?
feels weird. We're not connecting very well.
Mm-hmm.
And although I'd gone through that in the past, you know, it's always ended up in reconnection and typically deeper connection.
Right.
And,
We can do this. We're good. We'll get back.
Yeah. And usually you talk about what's happening, and, you know, it ends in a little breakthrough, and you realize like, oh, okay, that's what's happening. Well, it's funny. Like I couldn't get the break. Like couldn't get any breakthrough. And we go to counseling with Danny Silk, who was just awesome to open up, you know, his life to help us. And it's weird. It was like nothing I could do. I just couldn't quite break through. And then I started getting to the point where it's like, 3 or 4 or 5 months of opening up. And now I'm like really intentionally pressing in, like, hey, are we okay? What's going on? There's just a lot of disconnection in there. And eventually what happened was I realized like something's going on that I can't, like I just can't break through. I cannot reconnect. And the
Did it feel like walls were up inside of her, inside of you?
Yeah. Not inside of me. And I don't say that in a like, oh, it was her.
Totally.
I just say like, I was desperate to connect and desperate to like, and so that's when I just spent just tons of time journaling and praying, and which, you know, it almost at one point flipped into this, like, I thought my marriage was super solid. And all of a sudden I feel like I'm losing something. I don't even know how we got here.
Did panic start setting in as that feeling started happening?
Anxiety
starts hitting.
Yeah, not panic. I just felt like anxiety. Like she's saying things to me that I've never heard her say before. Like, I won't go into a ton of it, but like, I just want to be friends.
That would feel scary.
Yeah. Like, I don't know that I've ever been in love with you. Like just some things like that. Right.
So you must have had like an impending doom startup. I would, at some level at all.
I don't know. I just felt like really confused.
Yes. Cause this is totally off. This is
I mean, imagine if Abby came home today and was just like, I don't know that I've ever loved you. I just want to be friends.
I think I'd go throw up.
Or throw yourself off the balcony.
Totally, 1,000%.
Yeah.
What just happened?
The other side to this is my kids are really young.
Yeah.
So, you know, I wasn't 40 years old.
Yeah.
I'm 26 years old, and I just didn't know what to do. And so I've just so much anxiety trying to like save this thing. Like I'm watching this ship sink and trying to figure out why it's sinking and can't figure out what holes to plug. Right. Like I don't know why are we bleeding out? I can't figure it out.
I think that, that's so normal for people to, when I've seen in my office, the relationships start melting down. It's like, there's this desperate need, at least in one partner, that's like, I want to figure out what to do. I don't know what hole to plug. It's just everywhere. And it feels wildly out of control.
It's crazy. And so, you know, what I did is I started going walks every morning.
Yeah.
And because by then, like, the connection was so distant.
Yeah.
It was like clearly, right? It was like some clear lines had been drawn.
Like, we're roommates.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah. And I just can't, there's nothing I can do. So I just started going on these walks, like at, I don't know, 6 a.m. I just go walking the river trail because our house was right on the river trail. And I remember I found John Mark McMillan, his,
How He Loves Us. That one.
Just like his music. Right. And I remember, like, that was kind of the theme for my life. Like, I just push play on my earbuds or whatever. iPod, I think that's what came out. iPod. And I just was walking. I would just pray like every day, like, God, I don't know how to fix this.
Yeah.
And just riddled with anxiety. The craziest thing happened. So I did this for like 2 weeks, right? 2 or 3 weeks where I'm actually going on walks every day and before the kids had to go to school. And I'm walking, I'm telling God, like, you have to do something about this anxiety. I don't know how to fix it.
Mm.
And I took one more step. I could tell you where the sun was. I can tell you which direction I was walking. I tell you the picture where I was on the trail, and my anxiety was gone. Like gone, like disappeared. And I remember going back home and like I went through my whole divorce, which I'll share a little bit more details, and didn't have any more anxiety. I had pain, but no anxiety, which are two different things. And sometimes anxiety can be pain, for sure.
Yeah.
Is pain. And so I had this like gift, right? I was given this gift where literally I don't even know how to explain it. Honest to God, it's like it was just drained from me. And it was crazy because I was then able to go back home and think really clearly.
Wow. Yeah.
Because I don't have this like, oh my gosh, what's my life going to be if she's not in it? How do I save my marriage? Like I had the pain of what was happening. I had this desire to save my marriage and the will to save my marriage without the fear, which was such a gift. Like I look at it now
it's
and go
super
like,
relieving to be
oh
able
my
to,
gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. Because when you're in anxiety, there's fight, flight, freeze, fawn.
You're desperate.
You're in a 4F response and your brain is just blowing out almost. The desperation causes a blowout where you can't see up from down at all.
Yeah. And that was the biggest gift that I
Wow.
could have been given in that season. Even now, I'm just realizing how much of a gift that was from God. And
it probably kept you from being very reactive.
Yeah, super reactive in making bad decisions. So, to make a really long story short, at one point, I finally figured out like, my marriage isn't going to work. I can't save it. Like, my wife had been emotionally, mentally gone. And it wasn't anything that I could save, right? Like I couldn't fix it. She had ended up, having another relationship, and there's no details that I'm going to go into on that.
Right. But she chose into something else.
Yeah. And for me, it was like, oh, wow. Like that. It's just like, I felt like my whole life was on fire.
Yeah.
And, the challenge was I had such young kids.
Yeah.
That I was 26. So I think my oldest was 7 or 8 and my youngest was 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And so overnight, I'm like, just became a single dad and all the complications that come with, divorce. And
can I ask a question?
Yeah, you can ask whatever you want.
I'm curious, like for you personally, having someone walk out on you in that way, what did that begin to do within your, I don't know, the voices that ran around inside of your head? What were they about you? Like, did it become an identity statement about you as a man, as a person, as a husband? And if so, like,
yeah. Here's the honest truth is I feel like I had such a good dad growing up that, and mom and friend group, I had such close community and connections that I didn't look around and go, like it didn't rock my confidence as a man. I'm not saying I didn't have a moment of that.
Sure. But it wasn't
like the theme, right? It wasn't like, oh man, like no woman's ever going to want me again.
Right.
Because I'm just not a man. Or, oh man, like.
Did you feel shame about not being able to keep something together, or
I felt
just grief?
Yeah. I mean, again, okay. When you ask that, here's what happened when I had been, because I would think back to my journal, right?
Yeah.
And I remember writing in my journal, I want to give my whole heart and have it cost me if this doesn't work out. Like, I want to die here. This is this is the hill I'm going to die on. Like, I remember journaling that out. Like,
just giving yourself fully to that.
Yeah.
Like,
I remember
regardless of
making
where
a
it goes.
decision. Like, I am going to, until the very end, I'm going to give my heart away.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And it was I made a conscious effort and a conscious decision. Like, I'm not going to hold back. And I had to make a conscious effort. I remember writing to God, like, I am going to lay everything on the line, knowing that I don't think I can fix this, but I definitely know I can ruin it. I have to give everything, right? Like, I have to, which made me do the opposite, right? So I remember if she was pulling away, I was pursuing, and I'm not saying in a harassing way.
Yeah, correct. It was just like, oh,
I need to
she
still
wants to
think
shut
of,
down and put up her walls. I'm gonna pull mine down and I'm available. I choose you.
Yeah,
Deal.
and not only that, but like, I'm going to think of ways that I can pursue her better. I'm going to think of ways that I might be able to like open up my heart. Like, I am going to die here. This is it. This is going to be a death for me. And so when it came to the end, like, I died. It was a death. It wasn't so I didn't have anything in me that was like, maybe I could have given more.
Right.
I gave everything I knew to give.
I know you walked out being like, I know that I fully gave myself.
I gave everything.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, like, I know that that's not everyone's story. And, you know, some people are going to be listening to this and be like, oh, I was the one that messed up. That's okay.
Yeah.
Right. And we could talk about that a lot more on the other side of this. Is like, it's not like I'm a better person because I did that in, you know, maybe she didn't.
Yeah.
And I'm just thankful I was at a place where I was able to, right?
Yeah.
I had a different upbringing.
Yeah.
I had a different understanding in life. I had, you know, she's just in a different spot.
Yeah.
And I can understand that. So, but what that did for me is, you know, I mean, honestly, it's like a business. If your business fails and you did everything that you know to do, like, put your ego aside, ask for help, you did everything you know to do, right? Then you can live with that.
Yeah.
Like, you can just be like, okay, I don't really have a lot of regret. I have a lot of regret over what it cost my kids. I have a lot of regret over, you know, I don't know. I just think like I have a lot of, I wish that it could have been different, but I don't have a lot of like, oh, maybe I wasn't trying hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was really helpful too, because I mean, Danny and my dad were like, bro, she's never going to find a guy that's trying harder.
Yeah.
And that was just a fact, you know? So I'm not the best looking guy. I'm not the strongest guy. I mean, those are facts, right? Like, I'm not the...
Yes, they're absolute facts.
I mean, we don't need to lie to ourselves to be like, oh, she's never going to find a better looking guy. Oh, she's never... It's just like, I did everything I knew to do.
Yeah.
And I can live with that.
Yeah.
And that is the power that we have in life. So
I want to say something on that real quick.
Go for it.
Because I think that people need to really hear that. Like, there was something about like, can we look ourselves in the mirror and say, hey, did I do the best that I truly knew how? Did I actually give myself fully? And if I didn't, it's like, okay, what does that look like to be someone who gives myself fully to a situation that I know how? Like, I actually chose to fight for whatever it is, the relationships, the connections around me. Because I think that one of the biggest regrets that I hear out of a lot of people is that they didn't feel like they tried enough.
Oh yeah.
And they tapped out and gave up. Like, just because someone ends up in a divorce, we're using divorce as a conversation, right? Just because they end up in a divorce didn't mean they gave up. Like, you can go through a divorce and you actually gave all of yourself. You weren't giving up in the process. You were giving everything that you knew how to give, and it still didn't work out versus I didn't even try.
People give up. Like, I mean, that's the flip side is people give up and people don't try sometimes. And that's why we have a savior.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why we have repentance, which isn't to say I'm sorry. Everybody's sorry.
Yeah.
It's to change the way that you're going.
Yeah.
To change your entire mindset and to realize like, oh, wow, I gave up here. You know, I didn't do what I was supposed to do. Like, at the end of the day, we all have to be able to deal with that and to own that story, because as you know, like that's the only thing that fixes it is not looking at, it doesn't really matter what my ex-wife did. All that matters is what I did.
Yeah.
That's it. And so, I'm trying to find, where can I be an owner? What can I change? What can I grow? How can I do this different?
I mean, that's been 100% my posture inside of my marriage is, in the most difficult situations, I'm asking myself, am I taking 100% ownership for me, my behavior, my reactions, my responses? And that's just, for me, that's a lifestyle that I want to live, because like at the end, like, I don't want to be riddled with regrets because I allowed fear to drive me, because I allowed insecurity, because I had allowed shame to be my driving force that dictated how I chose to show up to situations, right? So I love that.
Yeah, I can usually do that a day after the argument. like, am I doing everything I can to listen? Probably not. Now I'm going to have to go own that.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, jumping back in, like at one point I realized, like, I'm not going to save my marriage. My marriage is over, and now I just need to walk. Like, I have to walk this out.
Yeah.
Which is tough. I mean, walking it out logistically looks like I'm a single dad and I got to raise kids on my own. And, I have to figure out how to do homework with them, and I have to figure out whatever, play dates and friggin', all the stuff that's not fun and complicated and challenging. The biggest piece was their emotions.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a lot for kids to go through that.
Yeah.
Mom and dad are falling apart.
It's horrible.
And can't stop the pain that they're feeling. And kids want to, like, not see their parents in that amount of pain. And they want to just be taken care of personally.
Yeah. I mean, you just basically tore their world apart.
Yeah.
Totally. So, I mean, that was the main focus, right? The main focus was, how do we get the kids in a place that is strong and healthy, and that's a journey. You're not going to do that overnight.
No. Before you kind of go further on into that, when you reflect on your relationship, because I asked you this years ago and I kind of want to reflect on it again, like, what do you think was your part to own and some of the messiness that you brought into the relationship that could have exacerbated that situation?
Yeah. So my personality, I'm super pleasing, and I don't say that as like a badge of honor or whatever. I just I'm the guy that, like, I don't like conflict.
Yeah.
I've had to learn how to do conflict.
Yeah, me too.
I really enjoy making people's day.
Yeah.
It's part of why I'm a good counselor. Like, I live for that. I live for, like, how can I help? How can I make your life better? Mm. And in that, you pair some of those things together, and, like, having needs wasn't something, honestly, that I was taught, and it wasn't something I needed to be taught. Mm. Which you're like, well, that's interesting. Well, you only really have to figure out what your needs are in the event that they're not really getting met well.
What do you mean by what your needs are? Let's just define that for some people.
Yeah. So, we all have different needs from, we're body, soul, spirit. So we're a triune being. And you can go through and think, like, well, what are the needs that my spirit has? Well, worship, right? Like, I need something to worship, and I'm going to worship money, or I'm going to worship God. Like, I got to worship something. Yeah. I'm going to worship women. I need communion with God. Like, I need hope. I need promise. Like, that, to me, when I look at my spirit category, like, those are the things I need. Yeah. I can't live without that. Yeah. And you find out really quick when you feel like God let you down, and it goes over and it starts to crash your body. Mm. Like, all of your body, soul, and your spirit, they're all tied together too, right? So it's really hard to separate one from the other. And you go, like, the simplest example is like, oh, we have needs in our body.
Yeah, like air, water, food. Yeah,
exercise, hygiene. And you can tell, like, okay, just don't sleep for 3 days, 4 days. Yeah. And you can't even function. Yeah. And so then your soul has needs. But then on top of that, like, we all have relational needs. Yeah, as well. And you start to get into those, and you have preferences in life too. That's like, Abby may go, hey, we're going to go for our next vacation. We're going to go to your parents' house, and then we're going to go to my friend's house. And you're like, well, okay, but that's not really what you want. Like, you have a preference, right?
Yeah.
And without being able to share what your preference is and have that be validated, like have her go like,
that equally has matter and weight in this decision making.
Right. How else do you feel value in the relationship?
Yeah.
And so, without needs and without boundaries in a relationship, there's no way to feel cared for.
Right.
And really valued.
So there could be 1,000 situations where she said she wanted something and had a preference, and you yielded to that.
Yeah. Why create a riff?
Yeah. Why create a riff? And so you're a guy that like didn't have any wants, preferences, needs inside of your world. So it's just like,
yeah, I'm the yes man.
Yeah. So you ran over yourself a lot.
A ton.
And then what it caused was her to never have to compromise. I say never, but there's a bunch of compromises where she could have seen that, oh, here's something that he has a preference on. Okay, I'm actually going to yield this over here and move into other centered love of like taking care of him and feeling like I can affect him and it matters if I give to him. Is that?
Yeah. And I think even more like, oh, he's a valuable human being.
Yes.
So, if Lauren was here today, I would say, I have to do this with Lauren.
Yeah.
Lauren naturally just like, she's much lower on the pleasing, like her need to like, it looks like this. Lauren's going to have needs. She's going to tell you what she needs and be very vocal about that and not worry how that affects you.
She's just going to let you know what's going on inside of her.
I'm the opposite. And she doesn't do it like in a bitchy way or something like that.
Yeah, totally.
But she is totally okay with going like, preferences. This is my preference. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm thinking. And I'm the opposite. I'm like going to accommodate. And I've had the real, like in my relationship now, I just show up more. So it'd be like, oh, I show up more. When she talks to me in a way that doesn't feel good, I address it.
And you're like, hey, that didn't really feel good.
I address it every time.
Yeah. That's
now,
good.
I wouldn't have before. I just hold it. I would take it.
That's me too.
And then I'd be battling her in my mind, but too afraid to say anything. So, all that kind of stuff. It just erodes the connection.
It really does.
Yeah. And regardless of it's very hard for her to really connect with me when that's not fully happening. And it wasn't like I was like a complete pushover or anything like that. It just wasn't working the way that it needed to.
And when, the truth is that when someone is expressing their longings, desires, needs, and I end up accommodating that, and there's an exchange of accommodation. Like, okay, there's a price that we pay when we accommodate caring for someone, whether that's our time, our energy, our resources, whatever it is. We're giving something away, and there's a price that's paid.
Yeah.
And you pay a big enough price, that person continually becomes more and more valuable inside of your mind.
It's true.
It's like in my marriage with Abby, at the point at how much I've sacrificed to love her. In our most difficult seasons, even when I was reflecting on the last couple of years that were really hard, and now we're doing amazing in so many ways, but there was really difficult times, but it wasn't so easy to be like, this person's disposable and I'd go elsewhere. I've paid such a price to meet her and accommodate her in so many ways that I'm like, no, that she embodies all of this energy, all of this sacrifice. I'm not just going to easily walk away from this.
It's really where we build bonds.
It is.
So I remember when I had my daughter Edie in 2020, it was like, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 a.m. and she's like crying and I'm so exhausted. And my wife, Lauren, is just like toast. And so I get up and like put on this ridiculous nightgown. Lauren's ridiculous nightgown. I just grabbed the closest thing to me because I was cold. And I'm in my like orange Clemson Tigers underwear. And I pick up Edie and I'm like rocking her. And I look up and I see myself in the mirror and I just look so ridiculous. And I started laughing. And then I realized like, oh, this is how I'm building a bond with my daughter.
Yeah.
I'm not building a bond in on the beach in Hawaii. Like that's great. But when you look back and you go like, we really bonded I learned how to meet her needs. She was crying. I learned what she needs. She's fussy. I know what she needs. I come home. She's happy. I know how to bring her more joy. Like that's what happened. So, I didn't do a great job at that in marriage. I didn't do a bad job, but it wasn't great. And that's an area that I realized, Danny Silk, after my marriage, after my divorce, he said, "Hey, listen, you're going to repeat this. You're going to repeat that in your next marriage if you don't fix it."
Good for Danny.
Yeah. So then I went down this road of like, all right, I'm going to freaking find these needs. And so I found a whole bunch of ridiculous ones. These are the only ones I knew how to find for a long time, and now I've found a good balance of, when what really matters, and you don't die on every hill.
No, you don't. It's
except for at first, and then you realize, like, man,
it's called the pendulum.
So hopefully we're closer to the center.
Yeah, totally. That's interesting. Did you find now that you're, how many years are you since that? You were 27 when that happened?
Yeah, I'm 42.
42. So, okay.
It's a long time.
Yeah. So what is there anything else looking back as you've gone through your healing process that you're like, oh, this played a role in that?
Yeah. I'm sure there is, but that was the main thing. Just looking back, is having needs. And
did it feel like she gave you any feedback that was along those lines or anything that surprised you about?
Oh, after?
Mm-hmm.
Nah, not a ton. She probably thinks so. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just was what it was,
Yeah. Well, when you got out of that, as you got out of that, you're doing the whole single dad thing. What starts happening for you in that? Because I think a lot of people have been through these things that feel like they really devastate them, and they're thrown into this whole new life that they don't feel prepared for, and they didn't imagine for their life. It's not anyone was like dreaming like it'd be so beautiful if one day I had a couple of kids and got a divorce.
Yeah, it's true.
That's not on our agenda.
You realize really quickly that. I remembered at some point, I realized at some point, like, there's no good roads.
No good roads. What does that mean?
No good roads. Every road is bad. So, like, I'm in a ton of pain. And what I want to do is I want to go blow up her life, right? Like, I want to go get some justice.
Yeah, totally. That makes sense.
Yeah, because I'm freaking pissed off.
The revenge period that we want to exact some form of justice.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the same time, like, the flip side of that is I just want to be done. Like, I just want to be done with all this mess.
Go on your way. Just let me move forward.
Yeah. And this is a place where people make really bad decisions.
Yeah. Super
bad, because pain has a voice. It says, fix me now. Do whatever you have to do to fix me now. Like, that's what pain's constantly saying. Snort a line of Coke, or drink a 6-pack of beer, or get another woman.
Go find a stripper.
Yeah. Whatever you have to do to get rid of this. And so when I say there's no good road, literally when you're looking at this landscape, it's like, well, I can't go back here. I can't get justice, like at least my version of justice. And I can't get out of this. Like, I guess I'm just going to be in pain for the next year and a half. Okay.
You're saying, so you actually accepted the reality that I cannot avoid this pain.
What else are you going to do?
I have to settle into it and allow myself to move through it.
Yeah.
Rather than around it.
Yeah.
Which everyone's always trying to go around it, and all you're doing is packing it deeper down anyways.
Yeah. And hope that you can find it later on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I made a real just conscious decision. That's where I remember I was sitting on the edge of my bed, and we always have these, like, really, I can't remember like most of my life, but I have like these vivid places in my life where I can remember. And I remember sitting on the edge of my bed thinking to myself, like, I want to inflict pain,
Yeah.
And I want justice. And God came at that moment, just in my mind. And he said, there's no justice in a broken life. Which I didn't really know what he meant, And so then I started thinking, like, oh, what do you mean by that? And he was like, okay, if you go ruin her life, what happens to your kids?
Yeah.
Like, that affects them, right?
Yeah.
And if you go and inflict pain on whatever, like the guy or whatever, it's like, well, how does that affect everyone that's connected to him?
Yeah. And the repercussions back of how he even interacts with the
Yeah.
kids or any of that stuff.
Yeah. And then he started to go like, the only justice that you could possibly get is if their lives got turned around.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And whatever else justice is provided, right? Like your healing, your kid's healing, that's the only way I was going to get justice. So I fixated my mind on this is the road.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is the path to that. And so, beyond that, it's like, okay, I have to build some routine in my life. Like now I have to build a life that I love.
Yeah.
Because how long do you want to sit in a life that you don't love?
Yeah.
And you could sit in that life for a long time,
Very
right?
long
Like
time.
you could sit in that place where you're like, oh man, I used to be married and we used to do holidays together, and we could, like, you have to process through all that pain, but you can't stay there forever.
No.
You have to go, okay, what's my life going to be? Or you end up in depression.
Yeah.
So that's part of how I didn't end up in actual depression. So we'll talk about my nervous breakdown in a minute.
Yeah.
But a lot of people end up in depression after divorce, and they end up in depression because their life is over. The better part of their life, the better part of their years, all their life that they've built up into this point is over, and now they have nothing.
Right.
And it's like, well, you just put all of your happiness, all of your dependence, all of your joy on a person.
Yeah.
And no one person was meant to be your source.
Ever. Yeah.
Ever.
No.
And we have to remember that, right? So that's also the source of tons of anxiety, is when you put somebody else in your God spot.
Oh yeah.
Which he's your source for identity, protection, comfort, unconditional love, healing, mercy, right? Like you put anybody in that spot and you put them in this unrealistic spot that it's honestly, you'll push them away doing it.
Yep.
And so at this actual stage in my life, I didn't have a lot of anxiety and I didn't have a lot of depression. I had pain and I got really good. I mean, really, really good at dealing with pain because I made my mind up to deal with it head on.
Yes.
And go through a process. It wasn't, a lot of people, if you ask them, what's your process for dealing with pain? They can't tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
And
I've asked so many clients that, and they look at me and they just stare. I'm like, we have a big problem here.
Yeah. And the challenge is, your life's going to have pain in it.
Yep.
From here on out, there's no escaping pain. Just logically, if you think about it, like your dad's going to die at some point. Your mom's going to die. Abby's going to make some poor decisions, not like
sure,
affair or anything like that, but she's going to say things she wished she didn't say. Like you have to have a process for dealing with pain.
Walk out and betray me and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's like not having another pair of shoes. Yep. You're like, well, unless you're just going to stay inside your whole life and never grow. And like, you got one way of dealing with your pain. Like, so, I just really dove into focusing on my pain, and that became my life. Eat well, sleep well, exercise, have fun, process pain.
Yeah.
And you can only do that a couple times a week, the process pain, but I was doing it. And man, it became this thing where I was stoked because every painful memory, every painful moment is a gift. Every time you unpack that thing and you work through it, one, it was a place to connect to God. And two, it was like, I just took one more small step into unpacking this hardship and heartache. And it was incredible. It was one of the most incredible seasons of my life.
Wow.
Yeah, honestly it was. And I don't talk about it a ton, but
I don't think a lot of people would use language like that was the most incredible season of my life. But that's oftentimes because we get so caught up inside of a relationship with avoidance.
Yeah.
And also feeling a sense of abandonment that we don't know how to push through.
Yeah.
That it feels just terrorizing, right? We end up feeling very victimized by seasons of pain that we won't just say, okay, I don't have to be a victim to this.
Yeah.
When I avoid, I become a victim. When I avoid, I end up abandoning myself and I feel more abandonment in my life. But again, it can be great when it's like, no, I will find my freedom. I'll find my liberty. I'll find not only resolution for what just happened here in this moment, but even greater things that are going on inside of me.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is I felt incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
So, the victim's a tough thing because the victim is the most powerless person to actually solve the problem that they're in. A victim is the person they're stuck in prison and they're the only one that has the keys to unlock themselves.
Right.
And you're just like, well, you may not have put yourself in that prison, but you're the only one that can get you out.
Yourself out. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
And so at some point, right, like you just make a decision. Okay, there's no good road.
Yeah.
So do you want to feel proud of yourself? Do you want to, a month from now, do you want to look back and see that you're making progress?
Yeah.
And then do you want to be stronger? Right. So those are all things that I wanted.
Yeah.
And so I just started to do the work. But then I found, you know what I found? This is the truth. I really looked forward to processing.
Yeah.
I
It actually
loved it.
became something that you enjoyed.
I really did.
Yeah.
And so, and we don't have to get a ton into, you know, how I process pain, but there's whole podcasts on that. But I would, like any painful thought or memory or moment that popped up into my head that was like there that I couldn't, you know, maybe it's my anniversary day or there's just a bunch of different moments that pop into your head, right? So every happy moment after divorce becomes painful, incredibly painful, right? So you just have thousands of these painful moments.
Here's Christmas.
Yeah. That all of a sudden you're like,
here's
wow.
a kid's birthday where we would have been together celebrating the birthday together.
All of them.
Yeah.
Right? All of them.
Yeah.
And, you know, if her life is going well and you see her life going well and you're like, oh, she just gets to move on and I get to like, you know, there's just a million different scenarios. And so for me, what I did is I realized at some point, like, okay, this is my life. And at some point I'm going to have somebody else in my life.
Yeah.
So I started with that in mind. Like, not I'm going to go find a girl. I started with like, I'm going to tell somebody my process. And I want to be able to say, in this, I did all I knew to do it right. It's just kind of how I think. Like I'm a little bit like that. I'm just like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability.
Yeah.
So I sat down and I'd put on like if I knew I had to process, I'd put on music that matched my mood, which wasn't happy music. It was sad music.
Yeah.
And I would get out, you know, my computer. I would type in font that was beautiful to me or inspiring.
Yeah.
And I would date it. I'd write the song title at the top because I wanted to always be able to go back into that moment in time, put on the music and meet myself there again if I wanted to.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. And then I would write without any filter.
Yes.
That's how it would start. And it wasn't pretty.
No, I'm sure not at all.
But it was so freeing.
Yes.
Right. So, and I would write. That's where I learned I could write, right? Because I went through school and basically cheated all through high school.
Wow.
Yeah. As I didn't get a lot of help growing up in school and just wasn't naturally great at it. And so I figured out at some point, like, oh, you're dumb and you don't do school and you can't do writing. And, you know, it just felt really unfair, which was not true. It was just my justification of my cheating. And so, but in my divorce, I started to write these letters from this place of pain. And when you dive into your pain, it is also diving into creativity.
Yeah, it is.
So unlock this incredible, like creative place. I'd wake up at like 3 a.m. with poetry going through my mind. And just, so I ended up, I would just, you know, work through I'd process through my pain. And I have just tons and tons and tons of letters and just journalings and all that kind of stuff. And I would just work through each memory, each moment. And the cool thing is I never had to write about the same thing twice. That's how you know it's effective, right? Like I just would go and if it was like my wedding day and I'm watching myself give my vows, right? Let's say that's the pain point. That's a memory that I had. I would just engulf myself in that. And I would write the whole story and I'd write it in a way that was inspiring and full of pain and full of truth and
like what you were feeling about that event.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah. From those perspectives, like what I think about her and that moment and my judgment. And, I'm just telling the story. I'm telling the story and writing it out. And some days it was from my perspective and some days it was from a different perspective. And some days, honestly, I'd sit down and I just have so much pain, I wouldn't know where to start. So I would just start with that.
That's really good because we can be so overwhelmed with pain that we're just shut down. We have to just pop the cork.
I would just write sentences, just whatever sentence came to my mind. And then that became like a rhythm. I would just writing sentences of like, it could be like pain without end and know where to start and when's it going to stop? And like, I would just dive into this, like, okay, this is where I'm at.
Yeah, which really is learning how to be present with yourself.
Yeah.
That's all you're doing is being there in the moment until that inner voice goes, oh yeah, I do have something to say. Here's what I got.
Here's the cool thing though, just because I want to leave people with at least something is if you start just by writing and you don't filter yourself, for starters, it's not a commentary on your character. It's just a commentary on where you're at, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like, my marriage ended, shucks. Oh, darn. It's going to be really hard to be like, you know what I'm saying? And you don't have to go blast that all over other people too. Yeah. So that's also what I learned is if I don't get it out here,
you'll end up vomiting out all over
somebody else. They had nothing to do with this.
Right.
So when I dove in and I would just be like, bro, well, you can only stay in the like raw mode, like the going hard for just a short period of time. Yeah. And you're crying, I'm writing. And then pretty soon you're just like, oh, I feel a little naked. Like because that emotion's kind of lifting and I don't quite feel the same exact way. And that's when God would meet me with my real questions. So the real question, let's just go back to, I'm sitting there and I'm seeing myself give my vows away. And that sparked, I can remember when I remembered that for the first time. Wow. Incredibly painful memory. Yeah. And I was so angry. I just remember writing it out. And I remember like, I'm sobbing. I'm crying so hard I can't type. And I have to stop crying to type. And, I'm doing that thing back and forth. Yeah. And then I write out a sentence about what's in my heart. And then I cry, you know what I mean? Like you're just like, bah. And I remember at one point, I finally got to what the real pain was. Because
what was that?
Behind every painful memory and moment, there's a need and there's what's really driving it. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't just that like that I had that moment with her and now she's gone. Of course that's painful. Yeah. It was that I gave away something that I can never get back. Mm. And like, how do I keep my vows? Mm. Like I didn't know I promised you something that I can no longer fulfill. I felt so powerless. Yeah. So a lot of my anger was just this, like, I feel so powerless to fulfill this vow that I made. And on the other hand, like, I feel like my innocence is gone and I can't get that back. When people fail to get to the real questions that they have all the way to the bottom, unless you get those answered, it's why people say this all the time, like, oh, you just give it to God. Well, what did you give to God? You have deep questions inside of you that have to be answered. You need promises. You need healing. And unless you actually go to God and say, hey, on this day, I gave away my vows and my innocence went with it. What do I do? I feel so ripped off from that moment because people generalize it, right? They try to throw this blanket of forgiveness over their whole entire life. Yeah. And you can't do that.
Well, and that's not forgiveness. Like,
it's not.
To me, even an aspect of forgiveness, like, I was in an exchange with someone on the internet recently where they got fired up because they basically said that, it's exhausting when people say forgiveness is for us, the people who have been hurt really bad. and they were saying like forgiveness isn't necessary for everyone. And I'm like, I pushed back and I was like, I think that forgiveness is super vital.
Yeah.
But I don't think you understand it, because at the end of the day, forgiveness is a deep acknowledgement of what was actually hurt
Yeah.
and who participated in the producing of that pain inside of your life. Like that's really one aspect of
Yeah.
what forgiveness is it goes, hey, it's not just a broad generalization. It is something very specific
Yeah.
inside of my soul that got really broken or lost or ran over or whatever it happens to be. And it happened to be through a relationship with this person where that entered in like that. And I lost that or whatever. And so, yeah, as you were saying, I mean, it's just so vital.
Yeah. And so I think most people, they get to the first, like what I say is just like the first level, which is like, oh, I'm choosing to forgive you for what you did wrong to me, which is great. Like that's admirable. And I think that, you know, you have to be able to acknowledge that. But the problem is that alone isn't a very healing state.
No.
Because again, it's like trauma. Like you have all these questions, experiences, moments that have to be met.
Yeah.
That you need answers to. And they lie beneath your anger, your resentment, your frustration, your insecurity. They lie beneath that. And so very rarely do people ever get down deep enough for that and then go, God, what are you going to do about this?
Yeah.
So then they say things like, well, forgiveness is like an onion. You just peel it forever. And it's like, well, you peel it forever if all you do is surface.
Yeah.
So, you know, for me, I was able to just dive all the way down and go on these journeys, get super hurt, pissed off, whatever, get below, get out the emotion, and then come to the place where I'm going like, oh, what are you going to do with this, God? Right. So cool. Cause I'd get these promises. I'd literally have God encounter me from a place of like, man, just these cool places. And then once God comes in and goes, here's what I'm going to do for you, or here's what's going to happen, or
here's a promise.
Yeah. Let me heal you right now or whatever. Then from that place, I would say, will you show me how you see her? So all of my judgment that I wrote at the beginning, I'd go back from that place of how he sees her, then I'm going to forgive her. So super genuine, right? Because my needs already been met. So I'm not trying to forgive her from this great place of lack and anger. I'm forgiving her from this incredible place of my needs already been met, right? Like you stole $1,000 from me. He just gave me $1 million. Let me just come back and go, I understand why you did that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make it right, but I want you to have what I have now.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things to that, because first off, even what you're talking about, that is you're acknowledging that a debt exists. Part of forgiveness is backing up to kind of like grab what I was even saying. Like we're acknowledging that a debt exists.
Yeah.
We're also acknowledging that the person can't pay the debt.
Yeah.
Ultimately,
not gonna
at the
happen.
end of the day, they're never going to be, no matter how much they apologize, they're not going to repair that inside of it.
No.
And it's seeing that the debt can not only be taken care of by something that's way bigger than us, but it can go beyond just the repayment of a debt. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. The person that the person that wronged you, including yourself, even if they came back and said, I am so incredibly sorry.
Absolutely.
Most often can't give you back what you lost.
No, they can't. And so there's a bigger repair. And so the promise starts getting taken. Like, your conversation becomes, all right, what do you want to do about this thing that I'm very aware of? How are we going to resolve this? Oh, there's a promise of resolve. There's gifts inside of this that are going to restore and repair my heart. Okay. And the other thing inside of that, because when we do that, we're humanizing our experience. We're like seeing the reality of ourselves in the mirror and going, oh, that actually mattered. There's a need there. There's a humanization. There's a validation that takes place. And then it goes from that to what you said, which was, then I humanized her.
Yeah.
And a big part of the forgiveness process is like, we've now had compassion for our circumstance and a possibility of being taken care of. And then we go, okay, I see the person across from me and probably the places where they were really hurt and they were really broken, and they were probably doing the best they knew how from that place and that posture that they were in. And it was really messy in their soul. And then being able to even have a compassion of like, oh, I want good things for them.
Yeah.
And you talked about, let me bring that back to one other thing you said, because you talked about justice. And for me, I ultimately define justice, I think very similar, which is at the end of the day, it's a restoration of humanity. It's redeeming something that feels so shattered, and then it gets put back together in a way that it's like beauty got extracted out of the darkness that took place. And so to me, ultimately, like I'm sitting back going, yeah, there's a million ways that I'd like to exact justice, but it's not the highest form of justice. The highest form of justice is that person gets healed anyways. Yeah. And we each are getting our healings, and we're each getting back to a place of knowing what actual love is, and hope and goodness and joy.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah. I think there's just so much freedom in being able to have a way that is your way out, right? Like that's the real way. At least for me, that's the way that I went, okay, this is the road to wholeness and health. And so that's what I walked. I walked that for a year, and probably took about 6 or 7 months before I was like, wow, it's been a while since I processed.
Wow.
And you can't do it every day. You just can't. Your emotions have to recharge.
Yeah.
And you got to go have fun. You got to go have stupid fun. That doesn't don't do something stupid, but go do mindless things, go exercise, go jump on a jet ski, and that's kind of the season that you met me in, is just stupid fun, and doing all kinds of things to like emotionally recharge, and then come back and process when you need to. But that was just, I look back at my life and go like, that was one of the most incredible seasons that I was in.
I'm just going to go ahead and stop the episode right there. I'm in the editing room right now. Jason and I had a much more extensive conversation. You just listened to part 1, where Jason shares the story of his divorce and how he faced his pain process inside of that. In part 2, I actually jump into a conversation with him about anxiety that came back in his life after his first bout of it inside of his marriage. He ended up facing a breakdown in life. And I think that we as humans across the board have all had tragedies hit our lives that we didn't plan for. And conversations like we had here today in this divorce process, and the conversation that we're going to have next week is such a vital conversation. It helps us remember that, 1, we're just not alone inside of the process. And 2, that there are roadmaps to get through pain, whether it be loss and tragedy, or it be things like the anxiety we're going to talk about next week that Jason developed inside of his life. Or 3, we just realize that we're more powerful than we actually know that we are, that we're actually not fragile, and we're very capable. And we're going to get into that portion of the conversation in the next week's episode. And if you've been impacted by the Connected Life, not just this episode, but any episodes, please do us a favor, rate, review, subscribe, and share it to people. Go out and rate and review this on iTunes. It's really great, because when people see the reviews that are so amazing that you guys have already given us, it gives us opportunities to even bring other guests on that go, oh, this is what this podcast is about. I want to come share myself over here. And we have a lot of people that we feel like would be really cool guests that you guys would love. And part of supporting us and getting those guests here is rating, reviewing, subscribing, and sharing, because the more downloads we get, the more people are apt to say yes when we go to invite them to have conversations, especially people who have larger platforms. And so we just want to be able to bring those type of people to you guys. And with that said, I just thank you all for listening to The Connected Life, and we'll see you next week. Bye now.